I would like to begin this episode by acknowledging that I am located in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and I am privileged and honored to live and learn on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishnaabeg Algonquin Nation.
Hello, you're listening to Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front, produced by iGlen Studios, a show for emerging leaders from all professions. To hear from other leaders who have led from the front, made the mistakes, had the triumphs, and are still learning along the way. And now, here's your host, Simon Cardinal.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front. We've all heard the saying, you are what you eat. And it's well documented that our diets have far-reaching effects on our physiological and physical capabilities and endurance. In this episode, you'll hear from Dr. Trina Dorrah, a practicing physician, a fellow podcaster, certified life coach, and former binge eater, who will talk about the connection between healthy living and how we can show up as leaders. Trina will also offer advice and practical tools to help us lead healthier lives, allowing us to be our strongest selves. But as always, it's never about me. It's about the guests. So I'm going to try and be quiet and introduce Trina. Hey, Trina, how's it going out there?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
This has been a real pleasure. We chatted a while back, and one of the things I love the fact is, we can connect in different countries. I'm in Canada. You're in the United States. Here we're getting another snowstorm. You're probably not getting one where you're at.
It's in the 70s.
Oh, amazing. That is not the case here. So before we get into this, if it's okay, I'm going to do a quick visual representation of our surroundings, just so people can have an idea of what they're seeing. So for myself, again, same thing. I've still got my black golf shirt on with the Trench Leadership logo. I've got my headset on. My glasses have black rims. There's some gray hair on the sides of the running joke because there's always too much, and a little bit of dark hair on the side, on the top. And in my background, I have my screenshot of a fake brick stone wall with the Trench Leadership logo hanging from that. The logo itself is white with a purple accent coloring. It's quite nice, I think. And for Trina, she has a really nice black and white striped shirt on, a blouse. Do we call that a blouse? I don't know. She's got some hairs done up quite nice. It's hanging off her shoulders. The wall in the background, I think it seems to be like a beige, maybe an off yellow. There's a pink flower in one corner and some type of larger flower hanging or plant hanging off to in the other corner there. All right. So with that in mind, now that we all have an idea where we are, Trina, before we get into this, do you mind taking a moment and just telling us a little bit about yourself and ultimately how we got to this point?
Sure. So my name's Trina, and I am a physician. I always wanted to be a physician since I was in second grade. So I'm one of those people who always knew what I wanted to do, and everything that I ever did was with the goal in mind of becoming a physician. And in 2019, I believe it was, I found life coaching. I hired someone, and ironically, it was a weight loss coach who I hired. And I'd worked with him in the past, and he said, well, I am still doing weight loss, but I'm actually a life coach now. And I'd never heard of life coaching before, but I found his program to actually be really, really helpful. Not the weight loss part, but everything else that went along with his program. And I was kind of like, this is really interesting. At that time, I was feeling a bit burned out from work, and there was a nurse practitioner who was in my group. And through the life coaching, she actually ended up leaving her job. And I remember thinking like, oh, you can leave your job. So it doesn't happen that often for a physician to leave their job. But I just remember thinking like, wow, this is really cool, this coaching thing that took this person who was also unhappy with her job at the beginning of this program to the point where she made a decision and she actually left her job. And I was just really impressed by coaching. And so that was how I started my journey to learn more about life coaching. Then I became a life coach myself. And then in 2020 was when my struggles with binge eating really came to a head. And I ended up getting help for that. And once I got help, that's when I kind of decided I want to help other people with binge eating as well. And so that's kind of how I got here to be a binge eating coach.
Thank you so much for that. It's amazing I find that those of us who have always known what we wanted to do as a profession and a career, early on are very, very lucky, because my experiences, what I've seen in around anyways, is most people aren't that fortunate. I know myself, I always wanted to be in the military, and my daughter has only ever spoken about becoming a veterinarian. And the more people will tell her that it's going to be challenging, the more she's digging down and to make that happen. So
Yes,
congratulations for that.
exactly.
And
Yes,
it's
people would always say, "Oh, it's hard to be a doctor." And I was just like, and I'm going to do it.
yeah, correct. It is hard to be a doctor, but if the work is put in, it can happen. Yeah.
Yes.
That's amazing. Well, and it's also amazing how you were able to find a way to find the other passions in your life and still follow that physician career path, and kind of find a blend of the two.
Yeah, actually finding life coaching, I feel like really saved me from my burnout, actually, in being a physician. And so there are high rates of burnout in medicine, not just physicians, nursing as well, other people in medicine, very high rates of burnout. And whenever I found life coaching, that actually ended up providing me with a lot of the tools to help me through my burnout. And so I actually think the combination of the two is amazing. And I even coach at work, and I coach other physicians along with another physician coach to help them not just with burnout, but just improving their lives in general. Because as we know, life coaching, in my opinion, just makes everything in your life better. And so I actually use it to help other physicians.
Well, and that's fantastic. And coincidentally, the whole point that we're here to talk today is so that we can talk about understanding the dangers of stress eating, understanding when and how we're stress eating, look for the little signs, and how to learn to not just identify it, but how to, I don't want to say fix it, but at least understand it's there and how to live within it, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of times you might hear the term emotional eating. I think a lot of people are familiar with that. Stress eating is another term that's common. And so it's basically using food to deal with emotions. And I will say right off the bat that that is normal. A lot of times humans do use food to help deal with emotions. And that in and of itself isn't necessarily a horrible thing, but it becomes a problem if that's really your primary coping mechanism, or if that's really the only way you know how to cope with stress or cope with unpleasant emotions, or if you're doing it very frequently, doing it every day, maybe there's a lot of guilt and shame associated with it, doing it in secret, that's whenever it starts to become a problem. And certainly your podcast listeners deal with a lot of stress in their lives, a lot of pressure in their lives, which is similar to stress and pressure that I deal with as a physician. And if food is the way that you cope, it feels good in the moment, but then there are a lot of negative consequences that come from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, I know I can't speak for others, but I know for myself, when I'm stressed out, when I'm just when I need a moment to just kind of turn my brain off, I find even the act of just going into the pantry or the cupboard to look for something, knowing that I'm taking a moment to not feel or deal with the stress that I have going on in that moment, that is that's a good feeling. But eventually things just are, the danger is that things are going to get out of hand. Do you have any thoughts on that at all, or?
Right. And it's because the food that we're always reaching for, I always remind people, think about the food you're reaching for in that moment. It's not broccoli that you're reaching for or carrots or anything like that. It's usually maybe something that's highly processed, something very sweet, something that feels good, something that's going to kind of give you that dopamine hit, something that you love. And I usually tell people, if you really think about it, it's likely something you don't allow yourself to have at other times. And so that's one of the things that I talk to people about is all of these kind of food rules that we have that we place around food, putting food in categories of good and bad. Then whenever you have a negative emotion and you're looking for something to try to soothe that emotion, you're turning to food, you're turning to the food that feels very good. And there's often also that component of you're turning to the forbidden food, the ones that you are not allowing yourself to have. So you start eating this food, tastes very good. You're very excited. You're like, oh, yes, I love cookies. Let's just use cookies as an example. And you don't allow yourself to have cookies because normally you're telling yourself cookies are bad. And so you're just like, yes, I can have cookies. This feels good. I'm just going to keep eating. And then you can't stop and you just keep eating and you keep eating and you keep eating. And initially, yes, it feels good. And that stress is going down. But ultimately it feels bad on the other side. Maybe on the other side, you physically feel sick because you've had so many cookies. It might come with guilt or shame. You might just develop this idea of, oh, well, I've blown it. I might as well just keep eating. And so you're eating way more than you ever would have. And then you feel terrible on the other end. And the initial problem, whatever it was that you were upset about or stressed, that problem is still there because you haven't actually dealt with that. So I feel like food is kind of a false friend. Like it feels like it's your friend at the beginning, but there are so many consequences that come from it, which is why ultimately it's not the way that I would want people to cope with the stress and just all the difficulties in life. I don't want them to turn to food on a regular basis.
My understanding of that is that it cannot turn into a crutch. It has to be something you can use when it makes sense, but at the same token is difficult. I think of when I first started getting into a significant running program, and I didn't know anything about. I knew a little bit about calorie intake versus outtake. I knew the basic idea that if I wanted to lose weight or do whatever, that had to be more calories out than calories coming in. But what I did not take into account was the extra physical fitness, that effort that I was doing. So I didn't increase my daily caloric intake, but ultimately I was starving myself. And I didn't realize that. And I was like having a cookie and some peanut butter, and that was good. That's also my lunch. That was a significant problem. So it's important to pay attention. What I learned from that was it's important to pay attention to the different things and understand that cookie is okay at the right time. And like you said, think about when you're doing what you're eating. Does that make sense?
Right. You actually raised an important point. A lot of times people will think that they have something wrong with them. They say, I don't know what's wrong. I can't stop binge eating, overeating, etc. But then really when you dive in, you find out that they're just not eating enough. And then that's their body's natural way to try to compensate. So they are essentially starving their body, and their body is just trying to compensate. So nothing is wrong with them. And so I think that that's an important distinction. You have the group of people who may be overeating simply because they're not feeding themselves enough. And then you have the group of people who are overeating because they are simply using it to help them deal with life. And so both are important things to address.
Oh, very, very much so. And it's understanding what's going on and understanding. If only there were certified life coaches that could help people understand that. Do you happen to know one at all? Or well, what advice do you have for folks? Like, hit us with some certified life coach information.
Right. So I love talking about this idea of restriction. And so what I always tell people is restriction is anytime you are limiting what you eat, when you eat, or how much you eat. And I think it's very common in our society in all different ways for restriction to show up. We live in a society that pretty much from the time we're born is telling us that thinner is better and is constantly pushing diet. Like you can't even watch television without seeing some kind of advertisement for a diet. You can't go to the store without looking at a magazine. All the magazines at the checkout have something about diets or people who are saying, oh, look how I lost weight. I went on this diet. And so anytime something is telling you to restrict what you eat, when you eat, or how much to eat, or how much you eat. And then whenever we're placing these kind of arbitrary rules around food, these ideas that there are certain foods that are good, certain foods that are bad. Another way people often will mention it is healthy and unhealthy. And they'll say, well, I'm just trying to be healthy, but they still are having strict rules around food. And anytime they eat the unhealthy food, they feel guilty, they feel bad, they feel shame. And so one of the things that I really talk to people about is we have to let go of the restriction. We have to let go of the rules. We have to let go of putting morality around food, putting food in categories, because anytime that we're doing that and anytime we're restricting food, that's when we're going to be more prone or more susceptible to overeating the food. And so you go on some plan and the plan tells you you can only have carbs at breakfast, for example. But maybe you really love, pizza. Let's just say you love pizza. And so the goal isn't, whenever I work with clients, I'm not trying to tell people you need to eat pizza every single day, every single meal, and never stop. But what I am saying is if you're on this plan and this plan forbids pizza anytime other than breakfast, where most people aren't eating pizza, that's only going to work for so long. At some point, cravings and urges are going to come. And those cravings and urges, you can only resist for so long with willpower. You can only try to push them away for so long. At some point, that urge is going to grow and grow. And then you're going to give in, and not just give in, you're going to eat the whole pizza, right? Like you're not just going to eat one piece. You're going to eat one piece and you're going to say, oh my gosh, this is so good. You're going to keep going. Then you're going to say, well, I've already blown it for today. I might as well just keep eating. And then that's when you get in that cycle of just like overeating, binge eating, eating beyond what's satisfying, eating beyond your natural fullness. And a lot of shame and guilt can come along with that. And then you try to make up for that shame and guilt by going back to those restrictive rules and say, well, tomorrow I'm going to be good. Tomorrow I'm going to stick to the plan. And you initially feel good because you're back on track. You think you're back in control of things. But that restriction, again, at some point is going to pop up. And so what I talk to people about is learning how to let go of the restriction, learning how to let go of that mindset that food is good and bad, and let go of all of those rules and have more freedom around food and the way they approach food. And actually, by giving yourself more freedom, you end up eating less. And I think that that's a hard concept sometimes for people to get or understand. But the more freedom you have, then you're not feeling this need to binge or eat in secret because it's always available and it's always okay.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I know for a while there myself, I had this idea in my head where after 8 o'clock at night, I just wasn't eating anymore, and I would just stop myself no matter what. And that was just the number I picked in my mind. And looking back and reflecting on that, I think a lot of the times that was traditionally around the time I was starting to think about an evening snack of some type or whatnot. Because I was in this process of mindset rather of no, I need to eat less to get better and be more physically healthy. It didn't matter if I happened to not eat supper, I wasn't eating. And that had some significant follow-on effects that I didn't even realize were happening to me. Physiologically, it was affecting me at work. I actually found I was not able to focus, pay attention. And so the irony was the things that I thought I was doing to help myself were actually at the same token making things much worse. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Right. No, exactly. And I would even say, let's say that somebody came and said, I just can't stop eating at night. One question I would ask is, well, are you eating enough for dinner? Maybe they're not eating enough. And that's just their body's natural way of saying, I need more. Or maybe it's just a habit that they've gotten into. Or maybe every time at night, this would happen to me because I had young kids. So my kids would go to bed. I was exhausted. I would just say, oh, I deserve it. I deserve to have this thing. I made it through the day. I'm feeling so exhausted. And the issue was I started trying to kind of solve that with food. And then it turned into this habit where every night I'm just eating to kind of cope and unwind. Well, there are other ways that are actually more beneficial for me, other coping strategies, I would say, that I've learned now to help me unwind at the end of the day that don't always involve food. And so I think that that's kind of really getting to why are you doing this? What's driving this? Is it just hunger or, the biology, or is it some emotional need that's being unmet? And then do we need to figure out other coping strategies, other ways to process these emotions other than trying to fix it with food?
Yeah, it more often than not, from what I've read and what we've chatted about in the past, was it's more often than not, it's not something as simple as we didn't eat enough or we ate too much. There's tends to be many underlying things in the background.
Right. And then that oftentimes I think can take some work to start becoming more aware of what your emotions are. I remember when I first started doing this work, every time I would have a meal, I had to kind of do an analysis of that meal. Like, how was I feeling going into the meal? Where was my hunger on the hunger scale? At the end of the meal, I had to process what my emotions were. And it was really weird to do at the beginning because that's not what we normally do. But the idea behind it was trying to get ourselves more in tune with our emotions and then more in tune with what our hunger was. And really starting to figure out, was I eating because I was truly hungry, or was I eating more because of that emotion that I was having? And so I had to first kind of learn to identify my emotions, learn to feel what they felt like in my body. That was some of the work that I had to do as I was going through this, learning what emotions set me up for wanting to eat. What do those emotions feel like? Where do I feel those emotions in my body when I'm feeling that emotion? What are some different coping mechanisms that I can learn? So sometimes a coping mechanism could just be something like breathing, a breathing exercise, or a meditation, or journaling, going for a walk. That could be a coping mechanism. Some people will do things like tapping or physical touch, where they'll kind of like rub themselves. So there's different things that you can do to sort of help kind of calm down that distress and deal with that emotion and process that emotion so that you don't automatically turn to food.
You're absolutely right. I think for myself, it's about knowing what coping mechanisms work for individual people. Some people, like you said, like to go for a walk, others don't. So if the first time, my recommendation would be, or my thought would be, that if you're trying to find the coping mechanism that works for you, it might take a bit of time. Try different things, and there will be something that resonates with you. Does that make sense at all?
Yes. And even whenever I was kind of learning these skills and in treatment for binge eating, we would even learn to, let's say that I'm angry. Well, there could even be different levels of anger. And so I had to learn what coping mechanisms work whenever I'm mildly angry versus if I'm about to blow, then stopping to meditate may not work. I might need something else. Maybe I need to move my body, or we did even exercises where to calm ourselves, where we would say, look around the room, focus on 5 sounds you hear, focus on 5 things you see, for example, things like that, or body scans where we would have to stop and focus on the different things that we felt as we were moving through our body. And if you've never done it, I have to admit, it seemed quite strange. This is nothing that I ever learned in medicine. Like in medicine, it's very cerebral. And so these are not skills I learned in medicine, but they really can help to regulate emotions. And so part of it's identifying emotions, part of it's learning how to regulate those emotions and feel your emotions so that your natural mechanism isn't to just turn to food. And if you are somebody who is turning to food, I think it's important to not beat yourself up and to just know that you're doing the best you can. And so I think that was something I had to learn, was I was doing the best I could. I was trying to take care of myself the only way I knew how. And at that time, the only thing I knew was food. Now I do know other things. So I'd like to offer hope to your listeners that there are other ways, and you can learn other ways to deal with things other than food.
Oh, hello there. It's Glenn, the voiceover artist. And if you're hearing me, that means we're at the midpoint of this episode. Do you have an idea for an episode that you feel is vital for emerging leaders? Leave the idea in the comments section, and if your topic is chosen, you will have the opportunity to join us as a co-host during the recording session. So, drop us a note and let's talk. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you, and if you feel we've earned it, please tell your friends and leave a review to help us grow our following. And now, back to the show.
No, absolutely. And I love how you said that, in that everyone is doing the best they can and they're trying to figure it out. I know for myself, if I could go back to the example I spoke of earlier, how I would just shut myself down for eating after 8 o'clock at night. One of the things I started to doing when I realized that was actually not helping me was, if I was sitting there staring at the cupboard or the fridge or wherever, and I'd be asking myself the question, am I actually hungry or am I just craving? And then that would really decide whereabouts I was going to go and what I was going to do. And that made a big difference with that. I am curious though, because in a lot of different diet plans, you hear about cheat days and those different types of things. Do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Right. I'm actually very much against cheat days. And the reason I'm against cheat days is because essentially the idea behind a cheat day is saying these foods are bad and you can only have them on a cheat day. Well, again, to kind of recover from this, from binge eating, compulsive overeating, you can't put those categories around food. Keeping food in categories of good and bad, putting morality around food perpetuates that desire to try to restrict. We know that the restriction is at the foundation of binging. That was actually something I did not know. Whenever I first went into treatment for binge eating, I thought the problem was the food. I thought the problem was the food and that I somehow lacked control. Like I thought that I must just be some individual who was born without control and that everybody else had control. And that's where I learned that no, really, it's the restriction. It's the not allowing myself to have things. It's the telling myself certain foods are bad and that I have to stay away from them. That's what was causing the problem, the binging. And so that's why I don't like cheat days, because I feel like cheat days are encouraging restriction all these other days. And then it's like today, you don't have those restrictions, but they're going to be back tomorrow. And so then I think that that cheat meal can turn into a cheat day, can turn into a couple cheat days, then the whole cheat week, and it just all falls apart. And I just don't think that that's a sustainable strategy. So I actually don't encourage that.
I completely agree with that. And I think about how I love how you brought up the point about good versus bad. There is an assumption then we're saying that, oh, this is the day you can eat all the bad stuff that you can't have the rest of the week. I had read a couple of articles about dieting, and one article that really stuck out with me was the idea that no food is bad and no food is good, and rather we can eat whatever we want. But it's all about understanding moderation and understanding the environment of what we're eating, and that really stuck with me. So if I like bruschetta, so I can have bruschetta, I just can't eat the entire baguette full of bruschetta. It's all about moderation.
Right. Yeah. So I like to tell people that no food is bad food and all foods fit. And the thing is with the bruschetta, initially, if you are someone who has been restricting it, when you first allow yourself to have it, you might eat more than normal. That is true. But at some point, whenever you really allow yourself to have bruschetta as much as you want, you're not going to want it all the time. It's no longer exciting anymore because you literally are telling yourself you can have it every single meal if you want. And whenever we allow ourselves to have something with unrestricted permission, the excitement goes away. It's not as much fun anymore. And I found this out with macaroni and cheese for myself because I love macaroni and cheese. And there's a Chick-fil-A very close to my house, and Chick-fil-A makes really good macaroni and cheese. I don't know if do they have Chick-fil-A where you live?
I think there's one or two in Toronto. That's my understanding.
So my sister makes the best home style macaroni and cheese, and it's hard to find like a fast food restaurant that makes decent macaroni and cheese. But Chick-fil-A has figured out how to make it, and it tastes home style. So there's one near my house. Every single time I would drive past the Chick-fil-A, on the way there, I was thinking about the macaroni and cheese. No, don't eat it. Don't eat it. It's bad. It's too fattening, too many carbs. Sometimes I would make it past the Chick-fil-A, but many times I wouldn't. I felt like I was being pulled into the drive-through, getting the mac and cheese, eating it as fast as possible. If I did make it past, I'm still thinking about it on the way down the street, then having to do the same thing on the way back, no, don't eat it. Don't eat it. So then finally, once I kind of learned these principles and I said, okay, you can have the mac and cheese as much as you want. And it is true. At first, I did have a lot of mac and cheese. But then it kind of got to the point where I would ask myself, do I really want this? Or am I just eating it because I can? And then it kind of was like, you know what? I don't even really want this. I'm going to eat something different. And I would always say, but if I change my mind, I can go back and get it. And so what I started finding was as time went on, the mac and cheese became less and less interesting and exciting to me. Now I can drive past the Chick-fil-A and not even think about it. There's times when I go to Chick-fil-A and I order the salad instead, or they have this little side of kale salad. Sometimes I'll order that. Like there's no pull on me anymore from the mac and cheese because of the unrestricted permission.
I really love that. And I love how you're normalizing it. That's kind of what I'm getting out of that. It becomes, it still tastes great. It's fantastic, but it's just a thing. And
Right.
that's
And I enjoy
huge.
it when I have it now. And I do try to focus on it more as I'm eating it. Because before, whenever it was a bad food, when foods are bad, you often eat them fast. It's like you're trying to eat it before you remind yourself it's bad.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you just feel so much guilt and shame, and you're doing it in secret. And so it's different now. Like I'll eat the mac and cheese, and I try to actually think about it as I'm eating each bite and really enjoy it.
Oh, very much so. And I wonder, do you find you enjoy it more now that you can take that time and actually savor it and take that time, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I enjoy it more because of that. I can actually taste it. And I just enjoy it more because I'm not telling myself horrible things. Before, the whole time I'm eating the mac and cheese, there's this constant dialogue of awful things I was saying to myself in my brain. Now I'm not saying that anymore.
That's fantastic. I am wondering, in the context of emerging leaders and people that are getting stressed out and they're feeling all the pressure to succeed and all the different things that comes with being those new team leaders, and food is quite often the substance people will lean on. Do you have any thoughts on how we could offer some tips to people to recognize that and maybe figure out how to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite kind of strategies or techniques is something called intuitive eating. And so I love intuitive eating. I was introduced to intuitive eating and treatment. I'm currently in training to become a certified intuitive eating counselor myself so I can help other people. But it's just a different framework. And so it's basically a different way of relating to food that removes the rules, removes the restrictions, focuses on satisfaction, focuses on getting back to your body's own hunger cues, fullness cues, and you eat more according to that. Like you eat when you're hungry, you stop when you're full, you think about what you actually want, and you take time to enjoy it. Even going so far as to creating an environment that's enjoyable as you're eating, stopping the negative thoughts in your head, getting back into movement. That's a principle of intuitive eating, but not exercising as a penance or a punishment for something you ate, but just really learning how to re-identify with your body and just the love of moving your body. And also thinking about how food feels in your body and what food feels good and what food brings you energy and what food keeps you full and, what food makes your body function at its best. And so all of that is covered in intuitive eating, but without the strict rules that we are used to in diet culture and without the guilt and the shame that is normally placed around food. So that's usually what I tell people to do. And that's the approach I take with my clients. Uh, the philosophy of intuitive eating has been life changing for me. And so that's what I recommend to other people.
I think about it for what I hear in that is about taking ownership of what we're doing and paying attention to what's happening in the environment we're in, because we're there, whether or not we want to be in that environment, that's where we are. I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me that that intuitive eating is, it's, how do I word them? I'm having the word has left my mind right now. It's a long-term plan. It's not something that's a quick fix, like a lot of diet plans that we see out there. It's like, oh, if you do this, you lose 60 pounds in a month.
Right.
You probably will, but
Sustainable. It's
it's
sustainable.
sustainable. There's the word I was looking for. Well,
Yeah.
you must be a physician. And that's just that long-term sustainability. That's a big part for helping leaders going forward, because more often than not, if you're in your first role of leadership, you're not in your last role of leadership. And so building strategies early on that will help yourself be as effective as possible are also the things that are going to help you be as effective as possible for your teams.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up sustainability because the thing is, diets do work, right? So we all know somebody who's been on a diet and they've lost weight, or we ourselves have been on a diet and they lost weight. So they do work. But then whenever you study them long term and you look at studies of diet, there haven't been studies that show long term benefit. Most people will regain the weight back. And so, yes, there's always going to be some person who did not. But think about even the people that you know in your life, right? Think about the last 10 years, all the people you know who lost weight and were like, I lost weight. Like, how many of them are still at that size now, 5, 10 years later? And so that's what I tell people. Yes, diets work. For most people, they are not going to work long term. They're not sustainable. You end up on this cycle of yo-yo dieting. Oftentimes with that cycle, the trajectory, the overall trajectory of your weight is upwards. And then I also a lot of times will tell people, and this would be pertinent for your leaders, because it takes a lot of effort to manage your mind around being a size that you are not supposed to be. So I, at one point, was very, very thin about 10 years ago. But what I was having to do to be that thin was taking, 75% of my mental energy, maybe. I was always thinking about food, always thinking about my weight, always fighting against my body that was telling me it was hungry, trying to pretend it wasn't, trying to rely on this willpower, exercising, thinking about exercising. Like, it took up so much mental energy. And so when you think about a leader, how can you be at the top of your game? How can you be the best leader you can be if so much of your mental energy is being spent managing your mind around food and your body and weight? And so, yes, I could be that thin again, but I think about the opportunity cost. What do I have to give up to get that? And it's not worth it.
I love how you brought that up, and I love how you framed that in that it took so much work to mentally and physically to get to that point that you were at, but there's always a cost in life, and with everything there's a balance, and if the balance isn't maintained, eventually things will fall apart. And I know for myself, when I was really working hard, I was at the gym or running 6 days a week, and that was all fine. I lost a whole bunch of weight, but then I got hurt, as everyone does. Inevitably, injuries will happen, and then I put a little bit of weight back on because I couldn't do anything. I freaked out about that, and then I went even harder to get back to where I was. Eventually, much like you had said about the mac and cheese, the newness of this new exercise program I was on, it wore off. The energy of that, not wore off, but everything kind of settled down. And what I found was my body tends to naturally sit around the 205 to 210 pound range. And I had gotten down significantly lower than that. And the effort required to maintain that much lower number was just ridiculous. And I wasn't even really enjoying things. And I didn't even see at the time what was happening to me. I had friends and family asking me all the time, "Are you okay?" And I would very, very quickly brush it off because I was so focused on maintaining this number. It's just a number. And I know it's easier to say that, but it is just a number. It's about being long-term sustainability. It's about comfortability.
Well, and then where you are now, that sounds like that's more where your body wants to be. So it's not so much effort for you to maintain that. And then now you have energy to, for example, do this podcast, right?
Exactly.
Because you're not at the gym and you're not just spending all your time thinking about what you're going to eat next, or just being so hungry and not allowing yourself to eat.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Trina, we have had a fantastic conversation. We've talked a lot about what it means to why we stress eat, how we get into the emotional eating cycles. And you offered some fantastic tips and tricks to help people understand when they're inside that cycle and what happened, how to maybe learn to live with it, or not live with it. That's not the right way to word it. How to deal with it. Is that the right way to say it? I don't know.
How to manage it.
How to manage it. There we go. That's the perfect way to word that. Thank you so much. But I do think that this might be a good time for us to roll into the lightning round. What do you think?
Sure. Sounds good.
You'll be
Then
fine.
remind me how the lightning round works.
So this is 5 leadership related questions, and it's not difficult. I promise they're not lightning-esque as some of their questions, but they are leadership related, so you'll be just fine. Don't worry about it. All right. Question number 1. What is your favorite leadership word?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna have to think about this. Was I supposed to think about this ahead of time? My favorite leadership word. Respect. I would say respect. Am I supposed to say why?
No, it's up to you. You can if you'd like to. It's up to you.
Well, I would say respect, just because I think about healthcare, because that's where I work in. And I think a lot of times right now, a lot of people in healthcare aren't feeling respected. They feel like they worked very, very hard during the pandemic. They don't feel that effort has always been recognized by their employers. think you are hearing about a lot of people in healthcare leaving healthcare or unionizing because they don't feel respected. So I would say my favorite leadership word is respect, because I think it's so important to maintaining the health of your workforce.
Fantastic. Question number 2, cup half full or cup half empty?
I have historically been a half empty person, but working, and especially since I've become a coach, I think I have moved a little bit more towards the half full.
Perfect. Thank you. Question number 3, who do you look to for leadership inspiration?
Well, you probably don't want to hear my sister, but I
Sure.
do.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be
Okay.
anyone. It doesn't have to be
Yes.
famous. And who do you look to?
Okay. I would definitely say my sister. She's 4 years older. I have just always looked up to her. Just thought that she has a brilliant mind. She's an engineer by training, has an MBA, worked in the business world, just has so many life experiences. And so she is always the first person I call.
Okay. And question number 4, what would you like to improve about your leadership style?
I am definitely someone who does not like confrontation or the uncomfortableness of having to bring something up that may upset someone. But I do think that that is necessary. You can always bring it up in a kind and compassionate way. I tend to think, well, maybe it'll just fix itself, that I don't have to deal with it. But I think that's probably not always true.
Well, that's why it's something you want to keep an eye on and look and working on. And the final question, what do you think is your leadership strength?
I definitely think that I am a very kind, compassionate person, empathetic. I think I do a really good job of trying to put myself in other people's shoes and see where they're coming from and include their perspective in the conversation.
Perfect. That's it. That's the lightning round.
All right.
You
I
did,
made it.
you did fantastic. Not a problem at all. Well, we have had a fantastic chat, and I'm just curious if you have any final thoughts, and if people want to reach out to you, if they want to engage you for your coaching skills, how can they do that?
Yes. Well, the final thought I always like to share is that I realize whenever you struggle with food, there's a lot of shame that's often around that, especially when you are someone, just like I'm a physician, where I've been very successful in my life. Whenever you're a leader, you are very successful. A lot of people look up to you. They think you have it all together. And so I think it can be very difficult to admit that there's something in your life you don't have together. And I get that shame is a huge part of this, but the problems that you're having with eating, they thrive in secrecy. They thrive in the dark. And so I think it's so important to reach out for help, even if you have to do it when you're afraid, even when you have to do it while you're still feeling the shame. Definitely still reach out, because once you're on the other side and you have a lot of this healing, I can tell you from personal experience, life is so much better. And not just my personal experience. We both talked about it. We both shared personal stories on the podcast today about how our lives are so much better now that we're on the other side obsessing about food. And so if somebody would like help, they can find me on my website, which is foodfreedommd.com. They can go to my podcast, which is Diet Culture is BS, or they could email me, Trina at Dr., which is just DR, TrinaDorrah.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Of course, links to how people can reach out to you will be available in these podcast show notes. And this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for shedding a light on this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope it was helpful.
Oh, it absolutely was. Thank you. Well, in this episode, we learned that food is not good or bad, that food is not the enemy, and that everything is about balance, understanding that your cravings are okay, and that if you need to eat, it's okay to eat. It's understanding that balance. It's understanding where you are, why you're eating, and if you're in a stressed out moment, maybe take a moment and think about why you're so stressed out. Because in the end of the day, if you want to help yourself and you want to help your teams, it's about understanding yourself. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, leadership without passion limits the depth of your vision.
Never miss an episode by following us on all of your favorite feeds. While you're there, please consider leaving an episode review and let us know what topics you would like to hear about. Be sure to join us next week with your host, Simon Cardinal, for another episode of Trench Leadership, a podcast from the front, produced by iGlen Studios, music provided by Ashamel of Music.